On the evening of October 9, 2019, the crew of the crab boat Neve Marie logged a sighting off the east shore of Kodiak Island that the vessel's own captain, Hoyt Kolstad, then 51, refused to enter in his own hand. His deckhand, Rennick Fenner, 26, wrote it instead. 9 days later, a federal officer boarded the Neve Marie at the St. Herman Harbor float, took the vessel log, took the wheelhouse memory card, and took Fenner's phone, and issued a receipt that listed the items only by count and not by content. The cove the boat had been working that season has not been fished since. Kolstad sold the Neve Marie in the spring of 2020 and left the island. What follows is reconstructed from Fenner's memory and from a single still frame that survived the seizure because he had already sent it to his sister in Anchorage before the officer ever came down the ramp. The National Marine Fisheries incident file that should contain the rest is closed. The log never came back. This is Fenner's account, in his own words, as he gave it. I had been on the Neve Marie 2 seasons by then, and I knew that stretch of water better than I knew any road. We ran pots off the east side, out past the mouth, where the swell comes around the point and the water goes deep fast. There was a cove there we used to dump bycatch. Everybody did. You pull a pot and you have got fish you cannot keep. And you are not going to run them back to town, so you shake them over the rail and you keep working. That cove had a rock shelf on the north side where the seals hauled out. Harbor seals mostly. Fat gray things that would watch you work and never move. Kolstad noticed the seals thinning out before I did. He had a way of counting things without seeming to. He would look at that rock shelf every time we came around, and one day near the end of September, he said the seals were gone off the north rocks, and I said orcas, and he said maybe. He did not sound like a man who thought it was orcas. But there was nothing else it could be, so we said orcas, and we kept working, and I did not think about it again for a while. The seals were the first thing. They were not the biggest thing, but they were the first. And Kolstad had already seen it before any of the rest of us. And he had already decided not to say what he thought out loud. I want that understood before I tell you the rest. He knew something was wrong at that cove weeks before the night with the camera. He just did not have a word for it that he was willing to use. Then things started going missing in town. The first one I heard about was the Ekberg family's smokehouse out on the road past the cannery. Somebody came in the night and stripped the racks. Not broke in and made a mess. Not the bear tearing the door off, which is what everybody assumed at first. The racks were stripped clean and the door was standing open, and there was one print in the mud out back that Del Ekberg photographed and then would not show anybody. Everybody said bear. It is always bear until it is not. A bear does not open a door and leave it open. A bear tears the wall out. A week after that, 2 boats on our float lost their bait freezers overnight. Same night, both of them, freezers on the deck emptied, and the lids left leaning against the rail. Whoever did it did not take the freezers and did not take anything else off the boats, just the bait. A couple 100 pounds of herring and pink salmon gone off 2 decks in one night and nobody heard a thing. And we were all sleeping aboard that week because the weather was coming. I keep saying, nobody heard a thing. That was the part that got to me later. You would think 200 pounds of frozen bait coming off a deck would wake somebody. It did not wake anybody. Whatever took it quiet. And it took it careful, and it put the lids back against the rail instead of throwing them in the water. And that is not how a thief works, and it is not how an animal works either. The cannery dumpster went next. That one they blamed on bear for real. Because a bear will absolutely drag a dumpster, and this one had been dragged a good 30 feet and torn open down the side. But the guy who ran the night shift at the cannery, a big quiet man named Tobin Bramwell, who I knew a little, told me the tracks around it were not bear. He did not say what they were. He just said they were not bear, and then he changed the subject, and I let him. Because I did not want to be the one to say the other word either. Bramwell told me more later, when it was all over, and there was no reason left to hold it back. He said that after the dumpster he had started staying at the cannery through the night on purpose, sitting up in the office with the lights off and a rifle across his knees, because he wanted to see it, and because he could not stand not seeing it. And that twice he had, not close, both times out at the edge of the lot where the light gave out, a tall shape that came to the tree line and stood and looked at the building and did not come any closer while he was watching. He said the second time he had put the scope on it, and it had been looking right at the window he was in in the dark, from 300 feet, as if it knew exactly which black square of the building had a man in it, and he had taken the scope off it and not put it back, and just sat in the dark until it left. He said he never once felt like the hunter those nights. He said he felt like the thing had let him sit up with his rifle because it wanted him to understand that the rifle did not matter, that it could come to the lot any night it chose and chose not to, and that the choosing was the whole message. I did not understand what he meant until much later. I understand it now. Everything that thing did in our town that October was a message about restraint, and we read every single one of them as a threat, because a threat was the only language we had ever learned to hear. There were more. A subsistence smoke rack out past the Iverson place, emptied the same way the Ekbergs had been. A dog that would not go out at night anymore, and then, one morning, a dog that was gone entirely, chain and all, and its owner would not talk about the state of the chain. A skiff pulled up on the gravel above the tide line, 30 feet from where it had been left, dragged, not floated, with no drag marks from a keel, because it had been carried. Each one of these went around the float as its own small mystery and got its own small explanation, and every explanation was a door we shut so we would not have to look through it. We were very good at shutting doors. That October, we had a lot of practice by the 9th. That is how it goes in a town like that. Everybody has a piece of it, and nobody wants to hold up their piece next to anybody else's, because the second you do, the shape of the thing starts to show, and you cannot unsee the shape once it shows. So we all held our pieces separate. Bear, orcas, some junkie of a transient boat, anything but the thing, all the pieces made when you put them together. The sighting started around the same time as the thefts, but they took longer to reach me, because a sighting is easier to keep to yourself than a stripped smokehouse. You cannot hide a stripped smokehouse. You can absolutely decide not to tell anybody about a shape you saw at dusk. The Callio boat, working the same water we were, came in one afternoon, and the youngest deckhand on it would not talk to anybody. Took me 2 weeks and a lot of beer to get it out of him. He said they had come around the point at dusk, and there was a smell off the cove, a wet animal smell, strong enough to carry over the diesel. And then he saw something standing on the beach at the tree line that was too tall and too still and the wrong shape to be a man in waders. He said it did not move the whole time they could see it. It just stood there and let them look. Then the boat came around and it was behind them and gone. He told me one more thing about it and made me swear I would not put his name to it, and I will not, so I am telling it without the name. He said that when the boat came around and the beach slid behind them, he kept his eyes on the shape as long as he could. And in the last second before the point cut it off, it lifted one arm. Not a wave. He was very clear it was not a wave. It lifted one arm slow and held it up, and he had the feeling, and he knew how it sounded, and told me anyway that it was not signaling to the boat. It was signaling to something further down the beach that the boat could not see. And then the point took it, and they ran for town, and he did not sleep aboard again that season. I did not know what to do with that at the time. I put it in my pocket with the rest. It is only later, after the mountain, after all of it, that I understood a thing that signals to another of its kind down a beach is a thing that is not alone out there. And some part of that deckhand had known it in the first week of October, weeks before any of us let ourselves know it. Sable Iverson ran the fuel dock, and she was not a woman who scared. She told me one morning while she was topping us off that she had seen something cross the road up by the tank farm at first light, tall, dark, moving on 2 legs and taking the ditch on the far side in 1 step without slowing. She said she thought it was a man until it took the ditch. No man takes that ditch in 1 step. She had not told anybody but her husband, and she was only telling me because I was standing there, and it was early, and it had been sitting on her. There was a kid too, Bramwell's nephew, riding the school bus out the road. Swore he saw something big at the tree line through the fogged up window, and the driver told him to sit down. Everybody laughed about that one. It was easier to laugh about the kid than to think about the fuel dock and the smokehouse and the bait in the same breath. I had all these pieces by the 2nd week of October, and I was still holding them separate. I want to be honest about that. I was not brave about any of this. I did what everybody did. I kept my piece in my pocket, and I told myself it was orcas and bears and a kid with a fogged window, and I went to work. And then on the 9th we came around the point at dusk to pull the last string before dark, and the whole thing came together in about 90 seconds, and I have never been able to take it apart again. We were working the pots closest to the cove. It was that grey failing light you get in October up there, where the water goes the color of a nickel, and the beach holds the last of the light longer than anything else. I was on the rail sorting when Kolstad cut the throttle down to nothing without saying why. And when the captain cuts the throttle, for no reason you look up, and I looked up, and there it was in the surf. Bigfoot. I'm going to say the word because there is no point in me being coy about it now after everything it cost. It was Bigfoot standing in the shallows off the north end of the beach, over 7 feet. And I do not mean that as a figure of speech. I mean, I have unloaded enough halibut to judge a length, and it was over 7 feet and thick through the chest in a way that no man is. The face was the part I could not get past. It was not an ape face. There was no muzzle. It had a heavy brow and a broad flat nose and a wide human-looking face with the skin gone grey-brown and weathered. And the eyes caught what was left of the light and threw it back flat, the way a deer's do, except set in a face that was almost a person's. It had a seal, a harbor seal, dead. And it had the seal by one rear flipper, and it was dragging it through the shallows toward the beach, the way you would drag a heavy pack you did not want to lift. It was not hurried. It came up out of the surf onto the sand, hauling that seal, and the water came off its legs in sheets, and it stopped halfway up the beach, and it turned its head, and it looked at us. I had the phone up by then. I do not remember deciding to. My hands had done it while the rest of me was still catching up. I got maybe 11 seconds of video and one still that came out clearer than the video because the boat was rolling and the video smeared. In the still, it is turned 3/4 toward us with the seal in its hand, and its face is lifted, and you can see the left ear has a piece torn out of it. A notch in the top, old and healed. I did not notice the ear that night. I noticed it later, on the still, after everything, and I have thought about that notch more than I have thought about almost anything else in my life. But I will get to why. It looked at us for what felt like a long time, and was probably 4 seconds. It did not act afraid, and it did not act aggressive. It looked at us the way you look at a car that has slowed down near your kid, assessing, deciding whether we were a problem. Then it decided we were not, or decided we were not worth its time. And it turned and went up the beach, dragging the seal, and walked into the trees at the top, and the trees took it, and that was it. Kolstad had not said a word the entire time. When it was gone, he said one thing. He said, "That is where the seals went. That is where the seals went." He had been counting them off that rock shelf all season, and now he knew what had been taking them, and I watched it land on him. The whole season reframing at once. It was not orcas. It had never been orcas. Something had been feeding off that cove since before we started noticing, and we had been dumping bycatch into that same water the whole time. Chumming it, giving it a reason to keep coming back to the one stretch of beach where a boatload of men would eventually be close enough to see it. We had been baiting it all season, and we had not known. Here is the thing I could not stop turning over, and it is the thing that started all the trouble that came after. Everybody knows Bigfoot is not supposed to do this. The whole story of the thing, the reason it stays a story, is that it does not get seen. It is careful. It is the most careful animal in the woods. More careful than wolves. More careful than the cats. So careful that grown men spend their whole lives in the country it lives in and never get one clear look. That is the entire reputation. It is not seen. So why was this one letting itself be seen? Why was it raiding smokehouses in a town with dogs and lights and men who slept aboard with rifles? Why was it dragging a seal up a beach in front of a boat in the open and standing there long enough to be filmed? And doing it again and again, in one small stretch of coast, when the entire point of the thing is that it does not do that, ever, anywhere. Something had changed. That was the only answer that fit. A careful animal does not get careless for no reason. Something had made this one need more than it could get the careful way. More food than it could take quiet. Enough that it would risk the beach, and the boats, and the town, over and over, when every instinct it had was screaming at it to stay in the trees. I did not have the right answer. I want to be clear, because of how it went. I had the question right and the answer wrong, and so did every man in that town, and getting the answer wrong is what nearly got a lot of people killed. Because the way the men read it, once the video got around the float, was this. They read it as a predator getting bold. They read it as an animal that had learned there were no consequences here, that had figured out this town was soft, that had lost its fear and was working its way up from seals to bait to smokehouses, and would work its way up from there to something worse. They read the boldness as a threat. And when men in a fishing town read something as a threat to the season and the food and the town, they do not call anybody, they handle it. Waylon Corliss started it. He had a boat on our float and a temper and a real good rifle, and he had lost one of the bait freezers. And he took the video personally, like the thing had done it to him. He got Orin Breck and a couple others, and they decided they were going to go up above the cove and end it. They had the beach where it came out. They had the tree line where it went in. They figured they could sit the tree line above the cove for a few evenings and take it when it came down for the next seal. And they asked me to come because I knew the water and I had seen it and I could put them on the spot. I did not want to go. I am not going to pretend I was against it on principle, because in the moment, with the video fresh and the town spooked and a stripped smokehouse down the road, ending it seemed like the same thing, and being against it seemed soft, but I did not want to go. Something in the way it had looked at us off that beach had gotten into me. It had looked at us and decided we were not a problem. It had made a judgment about us. Animals do not do that. I kept thinking, animals do not do that, and I did not have anywhere to put the thought. So I said yes, and I went up the tree line above the cove with Corliss and Breck, and 2 other men on the evening of the 16th with a rifle I did not want to fire. The country above the cove was steep and thick, old spruce with the light already gone under the canopy, while there was still color in the sky over the water. We went up a game trail. Corliss knew and set along the top of the beach where the trees started, spread out maybe 40 feet between us, close enough to see each other and far enough to cover the whole approach. The plan was to wait for it to come down for a seal like it had, and take it in the open on the sand. We waited 2 evenings and saw nothing, and I want to say the 2 evenings of nothing were peaceful, and they were not. The first evening a raven worked the beach the whole time, walking the tide line, and near dark it stopped whatever it was doing and lifted off all at once and went out over the water hard. The way birds go when something moves that they do not like, and nothing came down the beach after, and we told ourselves it was nothing. The second evening the smell came. That wet animal smell the Kallio deckhand had described. Rolling down off the timber behind us and sitting over our line for the better part of an hour, thick enough that Breck gagged on it, quiet into his sleeve, and it was coming from behind us, from up the mountain, not from the beach we were all facing, and not one of us turned around to face it. I have thought about that. We could all smell that it was behind us, and we kept our rifles pointed at the empty beach, because the beach was the plan, and turning around meant admitting the plan was wrong. The smell sat on us, and then it lifted and went, uphill, unhurried, and we told ourselves that was nothing too. The third evening, the wind was wrong, coming off the water into our faces, which should have been good. It should have kept our scent off the beach, and Corliss was pleased about it. But I remember thinking the wind was wrong the other way too. If it came from behind us, off the mountain, we would not smell it coming, and we would not hear it in that wind either. We were watching the beach. The whole plan was built around the beach. Nobody was watching the trees behind us, because the whole story of the thing is that it comes to the water, and we had decided the story was true in the one way that was convenient for us. It came from behind us. I did not see it. None of us saw it, not the way you would think. What happened was that Brecke, who was on the far end of our line closest to the mountain, made a sound. Not a shout. A sound like the air going out of a man, and I turned, and Brecke was not at his post. He was 10 feet back from it, and down on the ground scrambling. And there was a shape at the tree line behind, where he had been. Big, low, moving. And was gone into the dark under the spruce. Before any of us had the rifle up, Corliss fired at where it had been. Just fired into the trees. At nothing, because it was already gone. And the shot went off the mountain and came back at us. And then everything was quiet, and Breck was saying it was right behind me. It was right behind me the whole time. It had come up on our line from the mountainside, in the wind that carried our scent away from the beach, and its scent away from us. And it had come to the one man on the end, and it had not touched him. It could have. Brecke was on the ground, and it was on him, and it did not touch him. It had come to show us it could, and then it had gone. and we sat up there in the dark with our rifles pointed at a tree line that had nothing in it, understanding for the first time that we had never been the hunters. We had walked up into its country and set a little line of men facing the wrong way, and it had walked down our line in the dark and counted us and left. And the only reason we were all still breathing was that it had chosen to let us be. We should have gone down then. I want to say that plainly. Any sane man goes down the mountain that night and never comes back up. But something had flipped in Corliss and in a couple of the others. And it was not courage, it was the opposite of courage. It was the thing that gets into men when they have been made to feel small and cannot stand it. Corliss did not want to go down. Corliss wanted to go up, he said. If it was not coming to the beach, we would go find where it was, and he said it in a voice that did not leave room. And the guilt and the fear that should have sent us home turned us the wrong way instead. And in the grey of the next morning, we went up the mountain after it instead of down. I have gone over why I followed him more times than I can count, and the honest answer is that I could not stand the idea of walking down while the others went up. That is the whole of it. Not bravery, not sense, just the thing in a man that cannot be the one who leaves. We tracked it up the drainage. It was not hard, which should have told us something. A careful animal does not leave a trail a man can follow at a walk. But there was a trail. Beds pressed into the moss, big ones, more than one, and worn ground between them, like a path that had been used a long time. And higher up the bark was stripped off the spruce in long pulls, higher than a man could reach. Corliss read all of it as good news. As sign we were closing on it, and I read it as the drainage filling up with the fact that there was not one of them. There was never one of them. The beds were different sizes. Some of them were small. We came up over a bench in the mountain around midday into a bowl of old timber where the drainage flattened out, and Corliss, who was ahead, stopped and put his hand back, and we came up beside him, slow, and looked down into the bowl, and none of us said anything for a long time. I am not going to be able to make you believe this part, and I have stopped trying. I will just tell you what was there. There were structures. Not a camp, not a nest. Structures made of deadfall and standing timber that had been bent and woven while it was living. Low-domed things and lean-tos built against the big trunks, arranged around a flat of worn ground, with a path system worn between them, and there were animals moving among the structures. Bigfoot, more than I could count at a glance. Big ones and smaller ones. And they were not doing anything a wild animal does. They were living. There were young ones. There was one sitting with its back against the trunk, doing something with its hands that I could not make out. There was order to it. It had been there a long time. It was a place. The whole story I had carried my whole life turned over in that bowl. I had grown up thinking the thing, if it was real at all, was an animal, a rare, shy animal that stayed out of sight. It was not an animal, or it was the way we are, but it had a place, and the place had been up here above the cove. The whole time, above the town, above all of us, for longer than the town had been there, and we had been living at the bottom edge of its country, thinking the country was ours. We had not found a monster. We had found a people, and we had shot one of them, and it had walked down our line in the dark, and let every one of us live anyway. Corliss had his rifle up. I saw him raise it, and I saw him find something in the bowl through the scope, and I put my hand on it and pushed it down. And he looked at me, and I do not know what was on my face, but whatever it was made him lower it. There was nothing to say. We were 5 men with rifles at the top edge of a settlement of things that could have come up our line in the dark any night that season, and had not. The math of it was very simple once you saw the place. We were not going to shoot our way out of that bowl, and we did not have any business trying. And Corliss, for all of it, was not so far gone that he could not see it once it was in front of him. He lowered the rifle. We backed off the bench the way we had come, slow, watching the trees, and not one of them came after us. They let us leave the same way the one on the beach had let us look. They decided we were not worth it. We came off that mountain on the 17th. Brecke never went back into that country, and neither did I. Corliss sold out within the year. We did not talk about it, the 5 of us, not because we agreed not to, but because there was no way to start. What do you say? We went up to kill an animal and found out it was a somebody, and there were a lot of them, and they had been watching us, be afraid all season, and had never once done to us the thing we went up there to do to them. I had the question wrong the whole time, and I only got it right coming down that mountain. Why was it raiding the town? Why was a careful animal being careless? It was not being careless. It was doing the least careless thing a parent does, which is take more than is safe, because there is something behind you that has to eat. The seals, the bait, the smokehouse, all of it up the drainage to that bowl and the small ones in it. It was not a predator getting bold. It was carrying food up a mountain to its young, and it had risked the beach and the boats and the town to do it, because that is what you do. And we had read need as menace, because menace was the only thing we knew how to read. The video got seized 9 days after the night on the beach, and I have already told you the little I know about that. A man came down the ramp with a fisheries jacket and paperwork and took the log and the card and my phone and gave Kolstad a receipt that did not say what it was for. He knew what he was there for. He did not ask a single question about what was on the card. You do not come for a thing that fast, that sure, with the paperwork already filled out, unless you already know what it is and you have done it before. Somebody has known about that bowl above the cove a lot longer than we have. That is the part I cannot prove and will not stop believing. The cove is empty now. Nobody dumps bycatch there and nobody pulls a string that close, and the seals, I am told, are back on the North Rocks. Fat and grey and watching nothing. Kolstad left. I stayed a while and then I did not. I kept the one still. My sister has it and I have it, and it is the only piece that got out. And it shows the thing turned 3/4, with the seal in its hand and the notch torn out of its left ear. I have thought about that notch more than anything, because 2 years later, a man I will not name showed me a photo from a game camera 500 miles up the coast, in country I have never been to, of something crossing a clearing at night, and it had a notch torn out of its left ear, the same notch. And I do not know what that means. I know what I think it means. I think the country up there is bigger than the bowl above the cove, and I think they moved through it, and I think the one that carried seals up to its young, off our beach, has walked a lot of coast I will never see, and is walking it still, and knows exactly where the town is, and has decided, again and again, to leave us be, real or fake, you decide. On November 3, 2021. 4 men left a hunting camp in the Skeena country of northern British Columbia and went up the drainage above it after something one of them had wounded the evening before. 3 of them came back down on the 5th. The 4th, Corwin Soulberg, 44, was reported overdue by his wife on the 8th and has not been found. The RCMP file lists him as a missing person, lost in rough country, presumed dead. The 3 men who came down, Lachlan Vardy, Garrick Olson, and Nash Frawley, gave statements that did not agree with each other about where they had been in the 2 days between, and then stopped giving statements at all. Vardy is the only one of the 3 who ever talked about what happened up the drainage, and he talked about it once, years later, and never again. What follows is his account. There is one photograph. He took it on the 4th, on the mountain, and he has never shown the original to anyone. But he described what it shows, and it matches exactly a frame that surfaced from that same country a few years later that no one has ever explained. This is Vardy's account, in his own words. We had hunted the Skeena 4 years running out of the same camp, the 4 of us, and I knew that ground about as well as a man from outside can know a piece of country he only sees 2 weeks a year. We came in by truck as far as the road went, and then by quad up an old cut to a flat above a creek where we kept a wall tent and a meat pole, and we hunted the drainages off that flat for moose mostly and whatever else. It was good country and it was empty country, and that is why we went, because you could hunt a week up there and not see another man. The first year we never felt anything wrong. The second year, looking back, maybe. The third year Soulberg started saying the ground did not feel right, and we ragged him about it because Soulberg was the nervous one, the one who checked the tent zippers twice, and it was easy to make his nerves into a joke. The fourth year, the joke stopped being funny about 2 days in, and by the end of it, Soulberg was the only one of us who had been right about anything. It started with the beds. Olson found the first one. He had gone down toward the creek to fill water, and he came back up without the water and took me down to look at it. And it was a bed pressed into the tall grass along the creek. But pressed is the wrong word. It was made. A body-sized hollow with the grass laid down all one way and packed, way too big for a moose, wrong shape for a bear, and it was close. It was maybe 80 yards below where we slept. Olsen and I stood over it and did the thing men do, which is come up with the reasons. Moose, bear, elk, even though there were no elk. We came up with the reasons and we did not really believe any of them, and we did not take Soulberg down to see it, because we did not want to hear what Soulberg would say. Then there was a second one, further out, on the bench above the creek, older. Then a third that Frawley near stepped in, coming back from a stand at last light, fresh enough that the grass had not sprung back, warm fresh, and Frawley came into camp, white and quiet, and that was the night we stopped pretending among ourselves, though we still would not say the word. Small things started adding up the way they do. Gear moved. Not taken, moved. A saw left on the meat pole in the morning that had been in the tent at night. A wet animal smell that would come across the flat and sit for an hour and go. And at night, sounds. Not howls, nothing so easy as a howl. Would knocks, one, and then an answer from somewhere else, back and forth across the drainage after dark. Placed two, even, and placed too smart to be branches falling. The bait we had out for bear went untouched the whole week, which never happens. And Soulberg said it was because there was something in that drainage that the bears would not come near, and for once nobody ragged him. The knocks were the part that worked on me the most. I had heard the explanations. Everybody has. Trees pop when they cool, branches come down, a bull will rub a tree and knock a widowmaker loose. I knew all of that, and I had heard all of it in the woods 100 nights, and this was not that. This was one knock. Sharp, wood on wood, hard. And then a pause, and then an answer from a quarter mile off across the drainage, and then the first one again. It went back and forth like men signaling across a valley, except no men could have been out there, and it kept a rhythm to it, and once, late, I counted the pauses, and they were even, and I stopped counting because I did not want to know that they were even. A thing that keeps time is a thing that is thinking. The third morning we found the tracks. Olsen found them on the mud flat down by the creek where he went for water, and this time he brought all of us, Soulberg too, because there was no keeping it from Soulberg anymore. They were pressed deep in the mud, longer than my boot by a hand and wide, across the ball of the foot. 5 toes, a real foot with weight behind it, and the stride between them was a stride no man walks. Frawley put his own boot down next to one for the picture we all take, and did not want to look at the picture after. Soulberg did not say the word even then. He just stood there, looking at the tracks going down into the willows along the creek. And then he looked up the drainage where they came from, and he said, "We should pull the camp in the morning." He said it quiet. And Olsen, who was the strongest of us and the last to spook, said we had 4 days of tags left, and that was that. We stayed. We stayed over the word of the one man who had been right every year, because the strongest man in camp wanted to fill his tag, and I went along. And going along is the thing I have had to carry. That was the same day the meat went. We had a quarter of moose hung on the pole from Olsen's bull, wrapped in game bags, up high where nothing should reach it, and in the morning one of the game bags was on the ground, empty, and the quarter was gone off the pole clean, and the pole was 8 feet up. Nothing that country stands 8 feet and takes a quarter of moose off a pole without so much as tipping the pole. A bear climbs and tears and leaves a mess. This was reached, taken down and carried off, and the empty bag folded, near enough that Frawley said it was folded, and I told him to stop saying things like that, and he was right, and I knew he was right, and I did not want it in my head. The meat did not matter, the reaching mattered. Something had stood at our pole in the dark, at its full height, over the tent we were sleeping in, and lifted our meat down, and none of us had woken, and it had wanted us to see that it could. We should have gone home. I have said that to myself for 4 years. We had every sign a man could ask for, and we read every one of them, and we stayed. Because we had driven 2 days to get there, and the tags were good. Another week, and going home over a feeling felt like something we would have to explain to each other on the drive. So we stayed. And on the evening of November 2nd, we were out on the bench in the last of the light, and something big moved at the edge of the timber, and Corwin Soulberg, the nervous one, the one who had been right all along, put his rifle up and fired. I did not see what he shot at. I was 50 yards along the bench, with my back half to him, and I heard the shot, and I heard something go down, and then go crashing off through the timber. Heavy, breaking brush a man could not break. And Soulberg was standing there with the rifle still up saying, "He hit it, he hit it." And Olsen came running, and Frawley came running. And we stood in the last light, looking into the timber where the crashing had gone. And there was no more light to follow it, and we went back to the tent. None of us slept. There were no knocks that night. That was worse. The drainage had been talking to itself across the dark all week, and the one night we put a bullet into something, it went dead silent. And silence out of that kind of noise is not peace, it is attention. We lay in the tent and listened to nothing. Listening back, and in the morning there was blood on the bench where the thing had stood. Dark, and a lot of it, and a blood trail leading up the drainage, and Corwin Soulberg wanted to follow it. I want to be fair to Soulberg because he is not here to speak for himself. He did not want to follow it out of bloodlust. He wanted to follow it because he was the one who fired. And if you put an animal down wrong, you owe it the follow-up. That is how we were all raised. You do not leave a wounded animal to die slow in the brush, and Soulberg could not carry the idea of having done that. So he made the case that we owed it the tracking, and the case was right by the rules we hunted by, and those rules did not have anything in them for what was actually bleeding up that drainage, because the men who made the rules never imagined it.
We followed the blood because it was the decent thing to do, and the decent thing to do was the worst thing we could have done. The trail went up.
It went up hard, up the drainage into steeper timber, and there was a lot of blood at first and then less, which any of us would tell you means the animal is either dying or clotting and slowing, and we could not tell which. The beds got more common the higher we went, worn ground between them. About an hour up, we came into a stand of old spruce, where the bark had been stripped off the trunks in long vertical pulls, higher than a man could reach, even jumping. The wood under it, pale and weeping sap, some of it old and grey, and some of it fresh from that season. Olsen stood under one of the high ones, and put his hand flat against the stripped wood, and did not say anything, and took his hand back. Frawley found the first of the stacks, a little past that deadfall, but stacked. Not fallen, stacked. 4 and 5 lengths of it laid up against a standing trunk, in a way that wind does not do, and gravity does not do. Leaned together on purpose. And there were more of them, the further we went. Spaced along the drainage, like markers. And I understood, without wanting to, that we had crossed out of country, that a thing passed through, and into country, that a thing kept. We were not tracking a wounded animal up a mountain anymore. We were walking up into somewhere that belonged to something, past the things it had made, and the blood we were following was leading us home to where it lived. Soulberg should have felt that worst of all, and instead it steadied him. I have thought about that. The rest of us were coming apart a little more with every stack of deadfall, and Soulberg was getting quieter and more sure, like a man walking up to a door he had known about his whole life. And then, maybe 2 hours up, we found it. It was down in a patch of flattened brush at the foot of a slope in the grey grass, half in a thicket of bare saplings, and it was alive. It was on its side, and its chest was working, and there was blood matted dark all down its shoulder and side where the bullet had gone in. And its eyes were open, and when we came up on it through the saplings, it did not thrash, and it did not roar. It turned its head, slow, in the grass, and it looked at us. I have tried a lot of ways to say what it was, and there is only the plain way. It was Bigfoot. It was 7 feet, if it was standing, and it was not going to stand. The hair was black, matted with blood and mud along the wound. The face, in the grass, turned up at us, through the saplings, was not an animal's face. Heavy brow, broad flat nose, a wide face with no muzzle to it. Grey skin gone greyer, with the blood loss, and the eyes, open, on us, tracking us as we came. Aware in a way that stopped all 4 of us, cold at the edge of that thicket. Its mouth was a little open, and I could hear it breathing. It was a sound I will hear, until I die. The longer I looked, the worse it got, because the more I looked, the more of a person was in that face. It was not the shape of it, though the shape was close, it was what was behind it. There was pain in it, plainly. The way pain shows in a face, you know, drawn tight around the eyes. And there was something else that took me a moment to place, and that I placed, and wished I had not, which was that it was afraid. Not of dying. I do not think it was afraid of dying. It was watching the 4 of us the way you watch people who have already hurt you and might not be done. Measuring us, waiting to see what we would do next, and there was a bracing in it, a readiness for more. And I understood that this thing had a picture in its head of what men were, and we had just confirmed the worst of it. Its hand was near its wound. One hand laid over the place on its side where the blood came from, not pressing, just laid there. And the hand was wrong for an animal, and right for the rest of it. Long fingers, a thumb, a palm, gone pale. A hand that knew where it hurt, and had gone to cover it the way anything with a mind does. Nobody raised the rifle. I need you to understand that even Soulberg, who had fired the shot, who by the rules owed it the finishing, did not raise his rifle. Because the thing about the rules is that they are for animals. And every one of us knew, inside a second of looking into that face in the grass, that the rules did not apply, that we had not wounded an animal, that we were standing over somebody who was hurt and looking at us and knowing us for what we were, which was the ones who had done it. Frawley took his hat off. I remember that. Frawley took his hat off like he was at a graveside, and I do not think he knew he had done it. Soulberg had gone down on one knee at the edge of the saplings, not to aim. The rifle was slung, just down on one knee close to it, with his hands empty and open in front of him. And he was saying something under his breath that none of us could hear, and I do not think was meant for us. He stayed like that a long time. That is the last clear picture I have of Corwin Soulberg before the mountain took him, kneeling in the grey grass with his hands open in front of a thing he had shot, telling it something, and whatever it was. I think it is the reason he went up instead of down. I think he had decided something on that knee that the rest of us had not. I took the photograph then. I do not know why. The same reason the deckhand of Kodiak had his phone up before he knew it, I expect. My hands did it. One frame, close, through the saplings, of it lying on its side in the grey grass, with its face turned up and its eyes open on the camera. I have never shown anybody the original. I have described it, and that is as far as I will go, because it is the only thing I have that proves I did not dream the worst 2 days of my life. And I am not going to let it become a thing that gets passed around and laughed at. It is not for that. We were still standing there when we understood we were not alone. It was Olsen who felt it first and put his hand out, and we all went still. And then I felt it too, that particular weight of being looked at, and I raised my eyes off the wounded one in the grass and looked up the slope, past it into the timber, and there were shapes in the timber, standing, not coming, not making a sound, just standing among the trunks up the slope, dark and tall and still, more than one, more than two, watching us stand over the one in the grass. I do not know how long they had been there. I think they had been there the whole time. I think they had come to the one that was down the same as we had, from the other side, and we had walked up under them without knowing and been allowed to. I counted them without meaning to. 4 that I could pick out of the trunks for certain, and maybe 2 more behind those that could have been shadow, and I do not think were. The biggest of them stood a full head over the tallest thing I have ever called a man. And it stood in the open enough that I could see it was looking, not at all of us, but at the one in the grass, and then at us, and then at the one in the grass again, and I understood the arithmetic of the moment all at once, and it emptied me out. They had come for the one that was down. They had come the same as we had, up the drainage to the wounded one, and we had gotten there first by minutes and put ourselves between it and its own, without knowing, 4 men with rifles standing over their hurt, one. And they had not rushed us. They had stood off in the trees and let us understand where we were before they did anything, which is a mercy no animal gives and no cornered thing gives, and it frightened me worse than a charge would have, a charge I could have understood. The patience I could not. Nothing happened for a long time. The wounded one breathed in the grass. The shapes stood in the trees. Frawley had his hat in his hands, and then the big one made a low sound, not loud, a short deep note down, under hearing almost felt more than heard. And it was not aimed at us. It was aimed past us at the one in the grass, and the one in the grass answered it. A smaller sound, wet with the wound in it, and something passed between them over our heads that we had no part in and no right to. And I have never in my life felt so much like an intruder in a room where something was happening that mattered. We were nothing to them in that moment. We were furniture the tragedy had to happen around. We backed out of that thicket very slowly. Nobody ran. Running was not in it, somehow, the way you do not run at a funeral. We backed out the way we had come, down the blood trail, and the shapes on the slope did not follow and did not make a sound. And when we were far enough down that the thicket was out of sight, Frawley started shaking and could not stop. And Olsen was saying, "We have to get off this mountain, we have to get off this mountain," and Corwin Soulberg, was not saying anything. He had that look. I had seen it on men before, but never that bad. It was not fear, it was the thing on the far side of fear. Where a man who has done something he cannot undo decides the only way to carry it is to go toward the thing instead of away. Soulberg had put the bullet in it. Soulberg had looked into the face in the grass. And somewhere on the way down, Soulberg decided he was not going down. He was going up, back up, past the thicket and the shapes, up the drainage to see where they came from, and there was no talking to him. I tried. Olsen tried. He was calm about it, which was the worst part. Calm the way Corliss had never been calm. A quiet, settled calm, like a man who has already decided, and is just waiting for you to stop talking. He said he had to see it. He said he owed it that. He said we should go down and he would come after, and we knew he would not come after. And we went down without him, because the alternative was going up, and I have to live with that too. The last we saw of Soulberg was where the blood trail forked off from the way down. We went down. He stood there, where the two ways parted, and watched us go, and then turned and went up. And I looked back once, and he was already into the timber, and going, not fast, steady, the way you walk towards something you mean to reach. And I have that picture of him, and it is the last one anybody has. I called out to him. He did not turn around. Olsen took my arm, and we kept going down, because Olsen had understood before I had, that there was a choice being made on that mountain, and only one of the two ways off. It came out at the bottom. We got to the tent at dark on the 4th. We did not sleep, and this time the drainage did not either. The knocks came back that night, all night. Up and down the dark, closer than they had ever been, one of them so near the tent that I felt it in the ground. And between the knocks, there were other sounds. I will not try to name, because naming them would mean I understood them, and I did not, and I do not want to. Once, late, something walked the edge of the flat, slow, heavy, all the way around the tent and back into the timber, its weight coming through the ground into where we lay, and it stopped, once, on the uphill side, right where the meat pole was, and stood there a while, and we lay under it with rifles we knew were pointless and did not fire them, because firing would have been asking for the thing we were praying would not happen. In the morning, the frost on the uphill side of the tent was pressed flat in a patch bigger than a man where something had stood a long time close to the canvas, listening to us not sleep. In the morning, Soulberg had not come down. We waited the 5th until noon, and he did not come. We went a little way up the trail, calling for him, up to the first of the stacked deadfall and no further, and got no answer, and got that weight of being watched instead, thick, from up the drainage, patient, the same patience that had stood off in the trees over the one in the grass. Olsen said, "If we go up there after him, we do not come down." And he was right, and we came off the mountain without Corwin Soulberg and drove 2 days home. I called his wife from the road, because I could not do it from the truck with the other two listening. I do not remember what I said to her. Frawley says, I said he got separated. I must have. It is the only thing any of us said to anybody for a long time after. The search went up the next week, ground and air, and found nothing. No Soulberg, no camp of the kind I am telling you about, no structures, no shapes, no thicket with blood in it, because by then the blood was a week gone under the first snow. They found a hunting camp with a dead man's gear still in the tent, and 3 men's stories that did not line up about where they had been for 2 days. And they drew the only conclusion the evidence let them draw, which is that Corwin Soulberg got separated in rough country and died of exposure, and that his friends were too ashamed of losing him to keep their stories straight. That is in the file. I have read it. It is a reasonable file. It is wrong in every way that matters, and there is not one thing in it I can prove is wrong. I did not tell them about the beds, or the knocks, or the one in the grass, or the shapes on the slope. What would I have said? I told them we got separated. I let them think what they thought of us, because what they thought of us was survivable, and the truth was not. Olsen and Frawley did the same, near enough. And where our stories did not match was where each of us had privately decided which parts to leave out, and we had left out different parts. And that is why they never believed us, and I have made my peace with them, never believing us. Here is the part I have not made my peace with. 3 years after, a photo went around the hunting forums out of that same Skeena country. A game camera picture somebody would not fully source of something crossing a cut line at night on 2 legs tall, and the man who posted it took it down within a day and would not answer questions. I saw it before it came down, and the thing in it, caught mid-stride in the flash, had its head turned toward the camera, and there was a notch torn out of the top of its left ear. I had never told anybody about the ear. On the one in the grass, the one Soulberg shot, the one I have the photograph of, turned up at us in the saplings with its eyes open. The left ear had a piece torn out of the top of it, an old healed notch. I have looked at my photograph more times than I want to admit, and it is there, plain, and I never told a soul. And 3 years later, there it was on a cut line, a day's walk from where we left Corwin Soulberg. The same ear, the same notch, walking, healed up, alive. So I do not think we killed it. That is what I have come to. I think Soulberg wounded it, and I think it went up the mountain to its own, and I think its own brought it in, and it lived. And I think it is up there still in that country, carrying an old scar in its left ear, moving through more of that range than any of us ever walked. And I think Corwin Soulberg went up the mountain after it and found where it lives, and I do not let myself think much past that, because there is no version past that I can carry. The country up there is bigger than any search. They move through it, and they know where the camps are, and they know where the towns are, and where the roads end. And for reasons of their own, they let us come to the edge of it and look, and then they let most of us leave. Most of us, I got to leave. I do not know what Soulberg got. Real or fake, you decide.